Prophet Muhammad's names, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Before him, some 7 people, yani, give or take, 7 people were named Muhammad. That's a name that the Arabs took from the Jews who told the Arabs about a prophet to come soon. So Arabs had named their son Muhammad, hoping that he would be that one. As for Ahmad, he was the very first to be given that name, alayhi salatu wassalam. Both are mentioned in the Quran, Muhammad and Ahmad. Allah said, محمد رسول الله والذين معه أشداء على الكفار رحماء بينهم. Muhammad is the messenger of Allah, and those who are with him are tough on the blasphemers, merciful with each other. Interesting tajweed rule here. You have here Ra, Kasra. So it should be light here, and then right after it, Ra, Dhamma should be heavy here. So it's a good practice for lightening Ra and heavying the Ra. For those of you who want to perfect your recitation, practice that one if you need to practice differentiating that light Ra from that heavy one. Allah also said in the Quran, وَمُبَشِّرًا بِرَسُولٍ يَأْتِي مِن بَعْدِ اسْمُهُ أَحْمَدٍ. Jesus said, and I come with the tidings of a messenger after me whose name is Ahmad. And Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam is also named Al-Mahi, eradicator of blasphemy. That means eraser. Mahi, eraser. Al-Hashir, the gatherer under whose law all people are included. Yani, the gatherer, the Hashir. This means the one whose law includes all the people from his time until the end of the world, Arabs and non-Arabs, and also humans and genies. Nabiyyu Tawbah, the prophet of repentance. Nabiyyu Rahmah, the prophet of mercy. Nabiyyu al-Malhamah, the prophet of the battlefield, or the Malhamah, that's the place of hand-to-hand combat. The Malhamah is the place of hand-to-hand combat, which is the battlefield here. And he is al-Muqaffa, the last, the last prophet, or it means the follower of the religion of the previous prophets. I have some footnotes here. I don't have any elaboration for Nabiyyu Tawbah. As I was saying it, I wish that I did. MashaAllah. So he is Nabiyyu al-Malhamah, the prophet of the battlefield. Footnote. This means that he was the one who was sent with battling. He was the prophet sent with conducting warfare. And that's a fact, It's not an evil thing. The kuffar are the evil ones. He said in the hadith, وَجُعِلَ رِزْقِي تَحْتَ ظِلِّ رُمْحِي. My sustenance was put under the shadow of my spear. This highlights the significance of jihad, fighting for the sake of Allah Ta'ala. In another hadith, he said, Al-Jannatu tahta zilali suyuf. Paradise is under the shadows of the swords. But if someone says Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was a warmonger, then that's blasphemy. Rather, he was a noble military commander and a great warrior, alayhi salatu wassalam. Wa subhanallahi wa bihamdih. His manners, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. Allah only sent humans who were trustworthy, intelligent, and mannerly. And Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam was at the highest echelon of these good qualities. And the best of traits were gathered all in one man, like generosity, pardoning, humility, and reliability to a degree that none before or after him will attain. So, pardoning, here's a footnote. Anas ibn Malik said, I served the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam for 10 years, and he never blamed me for anything I did, and he did not let anyone from his family blame me. Aisha said that she never saw the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam hitting a person unless he was fighting for the sake of Allah. The blasphemers from Mecca used to severely mistreat the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. They persecuted him. They assaulted him and his followers, and they killed some of them. They cursed him in his face, they hurt his relatives, and they wanted to hurt him several times. They dumped the camel guts on him. They said he was only a poet and a liar. And sometimes they said he was crazy, so they committed slander and defamation. Then Allah gave him control over them when he opened Mecca with an army of 10,000 soldiers, wearing a black turban, riding an animal while looking down, alayhi salatu wassalam. Yani Allah raised his rank and gave him dominion over them. He reminded them of what they used to do to him. He said to them, how do you think I'm going to treat you now? They said to him, we know you will only treat us with goodness. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, go, I will not imprison you, I will not kill you, you are free. And as for humility, here's a footnote. He used to sit on the floor, alayhi salatu wasalam, not usually in a chair. He used to eat on the ground and did not put the food on a table. He used to eat without leaning against something. He used to eat bread made of barley without removing the peels. So it means it's not soft. Sometimes he would ride donkeys. Sometimes he would ask someone to ride behind him. If he knew that someone was sick, he would visit. If the Muslims were taking someone to bury, he would go with them. Women and slaves used to ask the Prophet to go somewhere with them, and he would go without asking where. Sometimes the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to joke without lying and without harming any Muslim, but not often. Sometimes he would not cook in his house for a month or more. They did not use fire to cook anything, he and his family. They used to eat dates and drink water. Although he is the best of creations, he did not prevent people from meeting with him. And you know, when you're dealing with someone like this, meaning someone who really doesn't have worldly aspiration, he suffices with eating dates and drinking water and has high ambition to make progress. This one, the unjust people will fear greatly. When one ruler was told of a person that all he eats is cucumbers, he said, there's no way I'm going to be able to bribe him or buy him. What I'm going to do with this one? So the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam was at the highest echelon of these good qualities. And the best of traits were gathered all in one man, like generosity, pardoning, humility, and reliability. May Allah make us reliable. Ameen. To a degree that none before or after him will attain. With all of this, he was the most active in worshiping Allah. The Quran and the books of other prophets alayhimus salam testified about his manners. Allah said in the Quran, وَإِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. And surely you, O Muhammad, certainly have great manners. Allah gave the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam the best of manners. Footnote. Aisha used to say about the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, كَانَ خُلُقُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. Surely his manners were the Quran. Yani, as if to say, his manners were the embodiment of the Quran. Revelation, yani. She meant that if you want to know the manners of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then comprehend the verses of the Quran. And don't forget, when you mention Quran, the word Quran, in a context that means it's created, then it means you're talking about something created. What's haram is to say the Quran is created. It's not haram to use the word Quran in a context that refers to something created. Every good deed that Allah ordered be done, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to do it. And every bad deed that Allah forbade, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam avoided. Maybe one doesn't comprehend what this means. Maybe you do comprehend what this means, but let me give you an example to help you comprehend more. Imam Ahmad said about himself that he said, I never came across any hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, but that I practiced that hadith, whatever was in that hadith, at least once. So you would say, wow, that's a great feat. That's a high rank. He said, to the extent that when he knew of a hadith that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam got some cupping done, and then he paid the one who did the cupping a certain amount, he said, I did that. I went and got some cupping done, and I paid the person who did that same amount. So that's what Imam Ahmad was doing for the hadith. So what was the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam doing for the Quran? Anything that's in the Quran, what Allah commanded to be done of the good, the Prophet used to do it, alayhi salatu wassalam. And anything that the Quran forbade, the Prophet used to avoid it, alayhi salatu wassalam. Meaning, down to like when Allah says, wasabbih, so then the Prophet would say, subhanallah. He would obey the Quran. That's a direct command to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. Yeah. Wasabbih bismi rabbik. That's a direct command to the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. So he would obey and he would say, subhanallah. He sallallahu alayhi wasallam was also the best of people in form. Footnote. The Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam was not excessively tall, nor short like one whose limbs seemed to be closing in on each other. He wasn't excessively tall, yani he was not lanky, and he wasn't stubby. Short like someone whose limbs are caving in or coming in. He was of average height, leaning towards being tall. He was not purely white, nor was he dark-skinned. He was white with a tint of redness. His head was large, indicating the strength of his brain. His hair was not excessively curly, nor completely straight. He had wavy locks that were in between being curly and straight. Alayhi salatu wassalam. That's very beautiful. When it was easy to do so, he would part his hair down the middle. And he was seen with 4 braids. So a lot of Muslims, they like to do that. A lot of the Shabab Muslims comb their hair down the middle, like the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. But if you haven't done it, do it, inshallah ta'ala. When it was easy to do so, he would part his hair down the middle, and he was seen with 4 braids. His hair would come to his earlobes and sometimes touch his shoulders. At 60 years old, he only had about 20 white hairs in all of his head and beard. In all of his head and beard. He only had about 20 white hairs in all of his head and beard. He used to comb both of them, but not always. Some of those hairs were at his temples, those white ones. And some showed when he parted his hair. But they would disappear when he oiled his hair, those white ones. His face was not long, nor very round. Rather, it was round, but with some length in it. And it was not chubby. It was radiant, like the full moon, as opposed to the sun. Yani, comparing the radiance of his face to the full moon is more appropriate than comparing it to the sun. Yeah, that's the meaning of this statement here. For one cannot bear to look directly into the sun. So that's to say, one could bear to look directly into the Prophet's face, alayhi salatu wassalam. But once I saw the Prophet in my dreams, alayhi salatu wassalam, and I looked at him right in the eyes, and I had to look away because it was very strong, yani very had haiba, like awe from the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam. His cheeks were not high. His nose was not completely straight. Excuse me. Though one may mistakenly think it was. Rather, there was slight elevation in it, and there was light upon it, his nose. He had a wide mouth and nice space between his two upper front teeth and between his two lower front teeth. When he would talk, it would be as if light was coming out of his mouth. The black of his eyes was intense, and the white of his eyes had red lines. His eyelashes were long and plentiful. That's very beautiful. Long eyelashes and plentiful. His eyebrows were not bushy, nor were they connected, though one may mistakenly think they were. Anger would cause a vein to appear between them, between those eyebrows. And he would only become angry for the sake of Allah, because of his piety and his dedication. That's a level there. The rank of those who only do something for the sake of Allah. They don't do something for their own sake. You know the hadith. Man ahabba lillahi وأبغض لله وأعطى لله ومنع لله أو كما قال فقد استكمل الإيمان. Whoever loved for Allah and hated for Allah and gave for Allah and withheld for Allah, then his faith is complete. And maybe I mentioned to you a story of one of those pious people. This one was said, he's so God-fearing that if an ant were to crawl on his face, it's like he doesn't even feel it. His heart is busy with the fear of Allah. So the ant on his face doesn't distract him. This one, it was said, he was sitting in some shade and he was chilly. And right next to him was the sun. All he had to do was move over to be in the sun, and then he wouldn't be chilly. So someone said to him, why don't you move over and sit in the sun? He said, I didn't find an intention. So the meaning is, I didn't see by which angle can I do this for the sake of Allah? So I'm not going to do it if I can't do it for the sake of Allah. His beard was thick. It was as if he had the neck of a doll. It's a very beautiful, smooth neck. He had a nice physique, nice shape, alayhi salatu wassalam. And he was radiant. His body was thick, not fat, and not skinny. And it was firm, not flabby. Domestic, it's like means together. Firm. His chest and stomach were even. That means his stomach doesn't bulge. His shoulders and chest were broad. His body was not hairy. But he had a long strip of thin hair from his chest to his navel. And he had hair on his upper chest and his shoulders, and his forearms and on his shins. Between his shoulder blades, closer to the left, was the seal of prophethood. That's a birthmark that he had. It's like a mole. Named as such because the Jews and Christians of old knew that the last prophet would have such a mark on his back. A protruding red birthmark with hair. So it's a mole. About the area of a pigeon egg. The tips of his bones were big. And that appeared in his elbows and knees. The bigness of the tips of his bones. His preferred attire was a qamis, a long shirt, because it is the best for covering the body. His sleeves stopped at his wrist, and his qamis would stop mid-shin, and then the shine of his honorable shins would be seen. His hands and feet were thick. His feet were arched and smooth. Water would trickle off from them and not become trapped. His heels did not have much flesh. He would wear hoofs and he would wear sandals. He would lean into his steps when walking, lifting his feet from the ground with energy, and he would walk swiftly as if he were going downhill, not like the arrogant nor the lazy. And he didn't have an arrogant stroll, and he didn't walk like he's lazy, like dragging his feet, for example. And he wasn't pompous, and he wasn't lazy. He walked humbly, looking towards the ground more than the sky, meaning that's due to his humility, looking down. And that was also due not only to his humility, to him frequently thinking and pondering. It's because he's thinking. So he's looking down a lot. Alayhi salatu wassalam. He would not only turn his head towards someone, but his entire body. Yeah, do that. That has an effect on people. And maybe they don't even realize. You know, once I learned that hadith and I did that, it's like makes people happy. They don't even know you just turned your whole body or something. And this is a sign of humility. And when he would encounter someone, he would be the first to give the salam. He had the most generous heart, most honest tongue. He was the most easygoing person. Subhanallah, subhanallah. That's so important. Some people are high-strung, they can't relax. La hawla wa la quwwata illa billah. And a person whom someone would like to be in his company. Subhanallah. If someone were to suddenly or unexpectedly see him, he would be awestruck. And if one were to get to know him, he would love him. Subhanallah, I was just reminiscing with one of my dear brothers. He was overseas with me. And I said to him, do you remember the time we met Sheikh Fulan? The very first time we met him, it was just the three of us, me and you, and then he walked in on us. And we saw him, and all the light in his face. And then when he stepped away from us, we both looked at each other because it was so obvious. He said, yeah, I remember that. He knew we liked him too. Subhanallah. So why I'm saying that to you, I'm just here thinking about the meaning of this. If someone were to suddenly or unexpectedly see him, he would be awestruck. And if one were to get to know him, he would love him. Every good attribute he had was as perfect as such an attribute could be. Anyone who described him said, I never before saw someone like him, nor ever again. I never before saw someone like him, nor ever again. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, ما بعث الله نبيا إلا حسن الوجه حسن الصوت وإن نبيكم أحسنهم وجها وأحسنهم صوتا. Allah did not send a prophet but beautiful in face and beautiful in voice. And surely your prophet is the most beautiful of them in face and the most beautiful of them in voice. I says that to teach us, not because he's arrogant or conceited. And the ones who are very sincere for the sake of Allah, they can say things like this. It's not from their ego. They would say something like that if there was a reason to. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ. His biography Now, this is a great summary here, of course, or else it will be many, many volumes, or very long at least. This is basically like what's in the Mukhtasar. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was born in Mecca in the year of the elephant. Footnote. Al-Hakim in his book Al-Iklil and Abu Sa'id al-Naysaburi in his book Sharaf al-Mustafa have gathered what was narrated about the signs of prophethood that took place before the birth of the Prophet and after his birth but before receiving the revelation. Likewise did Al-Bayhaqi and Abu Nu'aym in their books called Dala'inun Nubuwah. Why that's here? Because it's mentioning he was born in Mecca. So a footnote talking about that there's documentation about his signs even before he was born and after he was born, but before he became a prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam. And amongst those signs are the dreams and the dream interpretations of some of the kuffar and some of the fortune-telling readings of some of the kuffar. Those are amongst the signs of the Prophet's coming, because in those cases, Allah made them accurate as more indication of the truthfulness of the Prophet, not just Prophet Muhammad, other prophets too. He was born in the year of the elephant, the year when Abraha decided to attack the Kaaba with an elephant. I have here elephants. As if I did learn it that way, though. And demolish it. This is the incident referred to in Suratul Fil. At the age of 40, he received the revelation in Mecca, in the cave of Hira. Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam stayed in Mecca for 13 years after receiving the revelation. Calling to the correct belief, he migrated to Al-Madinah and lived there for 10 years. Even after opening his hometown of Mecca, he returned to live in Al-Madinah and died there. You know, the Ansar were concerned. After Mecca was conquered, they were concerned that the Prophet ﷺ would want to stay there now, because that's his hometown. And who doesn't love his hometown? But the Prophet ﷺ taught us a lesson in loyalty. And he stayed with those people. And he said, wherever the Ansar will go, he will go. He died in the 11th year after the migration, on Monday, the 12th of Rabi' al-Awwal, in the chamber of his wife Aisha, and was buried there. He was 63 years old. Yeah, and was buried there at the age of years old. His masjid was later extended to encompass Aisha's place. Hence, his grave is presently in his masjid. None of the Muslims considered it shirk to put the grave in the masjid. And no one prevented the Muslims from seeking the grave and its blessings but Ibn Taymiyyah and his followers. وَسُبْحَانَ اللَّهِ وَبِحَمْدِهِ